Hello, everyone. I am Luther Hughes. I am a program manager at Artist Trust. I'm also a writer and an editor born and raised in Seattle. And welcome to the Tenants Rights Live webinar with Dinah Braccio from the Tenants Union of Washington State. We're back on Artist Trust. We are a not-for-profit artist servant organization. Our mission is to support and encourage artists across Washington State working in all disciplines. We do this through providing resources, grant giving, and other things. Also, I'd like to thank our partners, Washington Filmworks and WhipSmart. Washington Filmworks is a nonprofit that creates economic development opportunities for Washington State's film industry. And WhipSmart is a new creative economy-focused nonprofit that gives creative professionals in Washington State the business tools they need to succeed. And during the webinar, you can put questions and things in the chat. And while we may not get to every single question, we will answer the best ones, the best we can. And yeah, so feel free to use the chat, ask questions, be involved. And remember to be respectful and patient. The Q&A session part of that will come at the very end of the webinar. And that's about it for me for now. And Brian, feel free to take it away from here.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for tuning in with us. And thank you to Dinah, who's from the Tenant Education. She's the Tenant Education Coordinator for the Tenants Union of Washington State, which is a statewide organization committed to housing justice through education, organizing, and advocacy. And today's webinar is on tenant rights during COVID-19. So welcome, Dinah. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
So to start, can you give us an overview of the governor's eviction moratorium?
Yeah, so the governor has sort of had issued eviction moratorium bit over a month ago, maybe a month and a half at this point, but it got a real upgrade about 2 weeks ago. And so I'm going to be talking about that newer, better version because it's better and what is currently in place. So right now, the governor has essentially banned almost all evictions in Washington State. The sort of only caveat, the only sort of exception to this like eviction moratorium is if it is about like the imminent health and safety of like another resident. And it's also important to know that that is specifically defined in the moratorium as not if you contract COVID-19, you are not allowed to be evicted for that. That's not, yeah, that would not be allowed, but I think it's more the other unsafe situations that people can create for other people. So to get a bit more specific, you can't be evicted for being late on your rent or not paying your rent, for breaking one of the like lease terms, breaking like a rule of your tenancy, again, as long as you're not endangering other people, and even if your lease expires like during this time where usually you would need to leave, you do not need to leave. Yeah, so it's a pretty, they learned from their first one, and the second one is a lot better and much more all-inclusive.
At this point, the moratorium is just through the end of May, is that right? Or
June 4th.
June 4th.
So sorry, someone got locked out on the deck. Any sort of eviction proceeding cannot start until after June 4th. Yeah, and sort of anything that had been either already in process is delayed until then. The other sort of thing that is like banned by the extended moratorium is that landlord is not allowed to sort of issue any rent increases until, again, after June 4th.
And I know this is hard to answer, but do you have a sense of whether or not that will be extended? Is there any kind of scuttlebutt that you're aware of being part of the tenants union?
You know, it is hard to say. We're not really sure. I would imagine that if the governor's stay-at-home order gets pushed out beyond June 4th, that the eviction moratorium would likewise continue. But you know, nothing is guaranteed. But yeah, I think hard to say.
So June 4th rolls around and people, they may not have jobs yet or haven't been able to, they've been on furlough or whatever their situation is, and they don't have the rent on June 4th for that month. What do they do? What are their options?
So the moratorium also has in it that landlords are sort of required to make individualized repayment plans with tenants based on tenants' sort of individual circumstances. If their sort of ability, you know, failure to pay and ability to pay is like related to the pandemic. And so there's not like a cut and dry tenants have X number of months in order to to like get current on rent, but it's a bit more flexible. And one of the lawyers we spoke to did say that it's possible that if like a tenant is like still unemployed, like a reasonable repayment plan would be zero, at least for a little while. You know, it's hard to say how like those things will shake out once the courts reopen, but at least that's our current understanding.
And obviously, not everyone is going to have that kind of flexibility. It sort of is situational, and it depends on your landlord and their situation too, of course. So can you talk a bit about what the eviction process looks like if someone is at June 4th and they're like, what do I do now?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing that would usually need to happen would be some sort of like notice to pay rent or vacate. Right now, that's a 14-day notice to pay rent or vacate. If some buildings are covered by the Federal CARES Act that was passed about a month or two ago, that would actually require a 30-day notice. But in general, in Washington State, you'd need a 14-day notice to pay rent or vacate, and then your landlord would have to like file a formal eviction against you, and you would have a chance to go to court. And there's a lot of free legal assistance for folks who are facing evictions in Washington. Not uniformly available at all times across all counties, but there's often folks are able to connect with an organization called the Housing Justice Project, which operates out of many courthouses in the state. And then those free lawyers would be able to help perhaps enforce that provision in the governor's moratorium, or help try to find a payment plan or a different extension around exiting a tenancy.
And is there a way for people to find out if their buildings are covered by that CARES Act that you mentioned?
Yeah, there definitely is. It's a very reasonable follow-up question. And I am blanking on the website at the moment for how to do that. I think so. In general, that's like if they are receiving the landlord has received some sort of federally backed mortgage, and so that is something. If you find yourself in an eviction proceeding, that would be something to bring up to to a lawyer if you're able to get one. Potentially do some digging for yourself.
And then you mentioned the housing justice, I believe it was. Are there other assistance programs available to folks?
Yeah, so yeah, the Housing Justice Project does a lot of free legal assistance for folks facing evictions. The other sort of like main legal aid org that sometimes helps tenants is the Northwest Justice Project, and they can be accessed. They have a sort of a statewide hotline to like access free legal aid. And then, if folks are looking for rent assistance, like help paying the rent, that's something that's usually comes through 211. And those rental assistant programs are pretty stretched at the moment. They had been before this and even more so now. So definitely one of the things that we are working on along with partners is to get help expand those to like help people remain housed during this.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what is available at the Tenants Union for people as far as resources go?
Yeah, so we do a lot of one-on-one tenant education. We have a hotline that folks are able to call in. We're open 6 days a week on that hotline. And we're just there to sort of talk with tenants about what's going on with them, try to help explain what some of the state laws are, what some of their options are under the state law, and try to think of what some options are for them to move forward. So that's one thing we do. And I think the other main way we try to like help and support tenants is by helping folks get organized either in their building or in their cities, because we've found that is the best way to both enforce the rights that we do currently have and expand those rights to make them better.
It's actually a good segue to my next question. I know from social media that there are a lot of folks who are talking about rent strikes, either organizing in their building or organizing in their city.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about what that means exactly? And is that something the tenants union recommends? How do people go about doing something like that if they're going to do it?
Yeah, I would say if that is something you're like interested in, want to explore, the first thing you're gonna have to do is you're gonna have to get in touch with your neighbors. That one person in an apartment building going on a rent strike is not generally recommended. Honestly, it can be dangerous, for lack of a better word. And so the first thing that you're always going to want to do is to connect with your neighbors. And that a rent strike is just a group of people in the same building, hopefully withholding rent in order to get some concession from the landlord. And I think that last part is also important, that you have to have it. A rent strike is a tactic in order to get something that you want. And so if that is you want your landlord to reduce rents like across the board, that would be a demand that you might be able to win in that way. If you want your landlord to forgive rent for people who have lost their jobs, and in exchange the people who have kept their jobs will like continue to pay, like that would also probably be a good use, or like a reasonable use. And so it's really it's all about like working together with your fellow tenants, and that is where the strength comes from and the ability to affect change comes from.
And then so generally you're saying before it gets to that point, you want to communicate with your landlord, try to start a conversation, try to come to some sort of resolution first?
It is usually so under more normal times, like we would talk about like escalation of tactics, right? And that in some ways, like the rent strike is perhaps like the strongest tool in your tool belt. There's not much you can do that is like more effective than denying your landlord your rent money. And so, yeah, so like generally we would talk about an escalation of tactics, but I think when situations are dire, I understand why people would jump ahead a bit. And in terms of tactics, that's fine, but you need to make sure you're making that jump with your neighbors, because you need to all go there together. Yeah.
And what are some of the other tactics people can use? Is there a step-by-step approach to that?
Yeah, I mean, so usually some sort of like formal like request or demand made of the landlord, like usually in a petition would be like one way to move forward. And then, sort of what comes after that, I think depends a lot on um, what people in your building are interested or able to do. So that could look like doing a phone zap where you call the management company like repeatedly for a day or two. That could look like being in front of their office or perhaps even like their private residence, with signs or making some noise to like sort of draw attention to your issues. Um, some issues like are able to be resolved by getting the city government involved, depending on your city. And so sometimes that can be, filing a lot of complaints with the city can be another tactic. And so it's really only limited by your imagination.
And then before we open it up to questions from the chat, I'm curious, do you have any advice for folks about how to navigate this process in the middle of the pandemic?
Yeah, navigating the organizing process, or
navigating the eviction process in general.
well, there,
To
yeah.
do basically.
So really, there again, unless you are, I'm sorry, unless you are making an unsafe situation for like another tenant, there just shouldn't be an eviction process right now. If your landlord is threatening to evict you or trying to assess late fees or sort of trying to force you out illegally at this point, there is a complaint form on the Attorney General's office website, which is like the COVID-19 eviction moratorium complaint form. And that would be, I think, one way to get some outside pressure on your landlord. And I mean, folks may not be aware, but like the AG's office is actually suing a property management company or a building in Tacoma that is been egregiously violating the eviction moratorium. So that's not usually, I think, how those complaints will like be resolved. Most landlords will come into compliance when they realize that they could be sued or could be fined. But yeah.
Great, thank you. Luther, do you want to jump into some questions from people who are tuned in?
Yeah, I can. Thank you for that, Dina and Brian, for that conversation. We have a few questions. I'm just going to take some more from the chat. And again, if you are in the chat, feel free to put those questions there. So one question from the audience is there any talk that you, Dina, is aware of about total rent forgiveness?
And so that is like so we're part of like a national alliance called Homes for All that we are pushing for rent forgiveness, for rent and mortgage forgiveness for folks. And that is definitely there have been several cities that have like passed resolutions calling on the governor to implement that. That's something we're trying to put pressure on the governor to do. So yes, I think that's definitely honestly what is needed. And so it's just about building the pressure on the people who can give that to us, and that would really be the governor, the state legislature if they come back into session, or potentially even like through the United States legislative branch. And I'm so sorry, I have to go let my roommate back in.
Yeah, while Dina does that, again, feel free to put questions in the chat, and we will get to them as we can.
It's a new world.
Welcome back. Okay, another question. So this person says, I live in Seattle. My lease ends in July. Under Seattle moratorium, payment agreements can be made for up to a year after the emergency funds. Can I pay back if I'm not living there?
Yeah, I think the answer would probably be yes. The governor's moratorium says that that the debts are not like actionable, like they're not allowed to refer debts to collections agencies unless they have like offered a payment plan. So it would be perhaps like a weirder negotiation, but if they try to refer you to collections, that would be probably inappropriate. Yeah, I mean, I think the most likely thing they'll try to do is withhold your security deposit. So if that is less than what you owe, then that might be what they go for. But they might try to do that and other things.
A follow-up to that question, could we make a payment plan beyond our lease term for commercial leases too?
So I'm not really trained on commercial law. It's like a different section of like state laws. And for what it's worth, the commercial leases are only covered under the eviction moratorium when it comes to like the increases in rent. And that's not sort of explicit that they are covered in the payment plan situation. I mean, I think always your best bet is going to be like treating this as a negotiation. Your landlord can't get money from you if you have no money to give them. And if they end up referring you to collections, they take a big, the collections agency takes a big chunk of that. So I think trying to communicate with the landlord sooner and trying to like start that negotiation process is really the best way forward.
Thank you. Another question is, what protections are in place from preventing a landlord from abusing the ability to evict a tenant or other reasons? For example, agitating tenants for fabricating a life safety reason.
Yeah, so in order for them to get an eviction on like for like a safety reason, like they will need to prove to a certain extent to a judge or a court official that that is real and true and happening, which is not perhaps the highest bar that it could be, but it is it's not insignificant. If you are worried that you think your landlord might start down that road, I would begin now in documenting your interactions with them. trying to switch to a written form of communication. Yeah, and then I think one thing that is important to know is that like once that eviction moratorium is like lifted, in most parts of the state, if you're a month-to-month tenant, your landlord doesn't have to have a reason to terminate your tenancy. And if your lease is up in almost all parts of the state, they don't have an obligation to like sign a new lease with you. There are laws on the books against retaliation, for you either enforcing your rights, or in some cities that also includes the right to organize with your tenants. But it can be hard to fight those no cause terminations.
Okay, another question. Is there anything in place for landlords who own their building and don't have a mortgage? Law seem to address only those with mortgages, but do owe property tax and have regular maintenance / repair expenses.
I'm not, unfortunately, I'm just not really sure, that those are not my area of expertise.
Um, Another question we have here. Could me receiving unemployment affect my ability to get a new lease / move in the future? What are my rights?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, we had a really wonderful change to the state law, which says that landlords are not allowed to discriminate based on the source of your income. Um, and so what that means is that they need to treat all types of income the same, whether that be unemployment benefits. If you have like a housing voucher, they need to accept that. And so they have to treat all those, types of income the same as they would like wage income. One, you know, so in that sense, it shouldn't have an impact on your ability to find new housing, and it would be illegal if your landlord denied you housing because you were paying for it through unemployment. I think the sort of like, if your unemployment is less than like what you had been making, which is often the case, your landlords are still allowed to have a sort of rent to income ratio that they like require tenants to make. And so I think in that way, like it will probably be harder to find a place that you can afford, if you're making less money. But they're not allowed to discriminate based on the source of the income.
And then we just have one last question here. That is for you. One other question, just can you kind of talk about again or restate the information you said about the 30-day eviction notice requirement?
30-day.
Yes.
So outside of Seattle, Burien, and Federal Way, if you're a month-to-month tenant, your landlord is allowed to terminate your tenancy with a 20-day written notice before the end of the month. It's a really reprehensible practice that is something we've been trying to get rid of at the state level. But currently that is the law. And honestly, we have some concerns that like folks outside of those cities, instead of being able to have access to like the payment plans that they should once the moratorium has ended, could be given those no cause notices to vacate. And it's a real concern of ours, and something that we're working with our organizational partners to try to get some more clarity or support from the governor around that. But yeah, And I just, to reiterate, like, those are not, while those notices are valid, they don't get to just lock you out at the end of that notice. And that goes for all sort of like pay or vacate, comply or vacate notices, is that it's illegal for a landlord to just change the locks on you without getting a court order. That is illegal because also it happens sometimes, but it is illegal when it happens.
If that were to happen, what does somebody do if they can't get in?
Yeah, and so normally you would actually we would encourage folks to like get in touch with like the non-emergency police line, because they can help you regain entry. You do need to be able to sort of prove that you live there. However, we've been hearing that they're not as responsive to those types of situations right now. And so you would probably have to, file a complaint with the 8 Attorney General's office for like violating the eviction moratorium. And then you might also want to try to like get in touch with some legal aid organizations, whether it be the Housing Justice Project or the Northwest Justice Project.
Thank you. Just doing one more quick check for questions and not seeing any more. Brian, any other questions you want to ask?
Any closing advice, Dinah? Anything else you'd share?
Yeah, I mean, I think, these are tough times, but I think it's important to remember that I think if something does not feel right in your rental situation, if something your landlord is doing does not seem right to you, there's like a very good chance that it is not right. I would really encourage people to check out our website, contact us, like to learn about your rights as renters, because while they're not as strong as we would like them to be, they are they're there, and they can be helpful. So yeah, trust your
Thank
instinct.
you.
Right, yeah, thanks, Dina, for that, for joining us today and tuning in for the webinar for all of us. More information about the Tenants Union of Washington State, visit tenantsunion.org. For additional resources about COVID-19 for artists, visit artisttrust.org. And we'll be doing more of these webinars as we just go by and things like this. So please stay in tune to our website, follow social media, subscribe to our newsletter for all the latest information. And I will have all the information for you at the end of this video if you are tuning into the recording of it. And that will be everything. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks again, Dinah. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.